Okay. ਸਤਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ ਜੀ ਮੇਰੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ। ਮੈਂ ਕੁਲਵਿੰਦਰ ਸਿੰਘ BM ਐਜੂਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਤੋਂ। ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਕਿ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਹੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਲਾਸਟ ਫਿਊ ਡੇਜ਼ ਤੋਂ ਇਹ ਅਪਡੇਟ ਦੇ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ IHM ਦੇ COO ਮਿਸਟਰ ਸਾਈਮਨ ਲਾਈਵ ਹੋਣ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਆ ਸਾਡੀ ਫੇਸਬੁੱਕ ਪੇਜ ਤੋਂ। ਸੋ ਅਸੀਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਬਹੁਤ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਚਾਹੂੰਗਾ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਸਾਡੀ ਫੇਸਬੁੱਕ ਪੇਜ ਤੋਂ ਲਾਈਵ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਜੋ ਵੀ ਸਟੂਡੈਂਟਸ ਨੂੰ ਗਾਈਡੈਂਸ ਅਪਡੇਟਸ ਨੇ ਆਸਟ੍ਰੇਲੀਆ ਬਾਰੇ ਦੱਸਣ। Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, and welcome to everybody online as well who's joining us today. So today we're going to talk about a few things, and I've got a few slides that we'll go through as well, so that hopefully will give you a bit more information. But we're going to talk about three things primarily. The first thing is about nursing registration in Australia, which has changed a little bit in the last 18 months. So we want to give you an update about what's happening with nursing registration in Australia. The second thing we'll talk about is about work and employment opportunities, because once you're registered, you're then able to work, and it's important you know what the work prospects are and where the jobs are and how and where the demand for nurses is in Australia. And then the third piece we'll talk about is about education and some preparation programs, both for registration as well as to prepare you to elevate your career and really launch your career in Australia as a nurse as well. Okay, so three things, should take about 30, maybe 40 minutes, and then we're available to answer any of your questions. We won't leave until we've answered all of your questions. Okay, so if you have any questions as we're going along, just provide them in the chat box or the Q&A box, and we'll answer those when we are finished. Okay, so let's get started. First of all, who are we? We are the Institute of Health and Management. And as the guys from Bookmark just mentioned, we are based in Melbourne, and we have campuses in Melbourne, Sydney and Perth in Australia. We specialise in nursing education. So the Institute of Health and Management is a higher education college, which means we train nurses from bachelor through to masters at the moment. And then in the years to come, we'll then be running PhD programs as well. We're registered or accredited by TEXA, which is the same government body that accredits universities and private higher education. We both work to the same standards as well. For the last 2 years or so, we've been delivering the bridging course for internationally qualified nurses, and that's the EPIQ course. And over the last 18 months, we've trained just on 1,500 nurses to prepare themselves to finalise their registration in Australia. Before we started delivering the EPIQ course, another division of our company, another training institute, used to deliver the IRON program, which you may recall, IRON, which was the old bridging program. And in over 10 or 12 years that we delivered that program from the beginning of 2000, we have trained just over 10,000 nurses to be ready for registration in Australia. So we know nursing, we know the healthcare sector, and we're experts at preparing nurses to enter the healthcare workforce. So what are we going to talk about? I've kind of given you an idea. We'll talk about nursing registration. We'll talk about job opportunities. So let's get straight into it. As I just mentioned, we have campuses in Melbourne, Sydney and Perth. The photos you see on that slide particularly are our Perth campus. Training labs in the bottom right-hand corner, classrooms overlooking the river in Perth, and that's the top left-hand corner is our library and study area as well. We also have offices in India, UAE, Philippines, so UAE, Dubai, Nepal and Colombia, and they're both training centres as well as student counselling and information centres as well. So let's talk about jobs first of all. There is a very strong demand for overseas or internationally qualified nurses to come and live and work in Australia. And the reason for that is very simple. As with many countries in the world, our population in Australia is aging. The total population of Australia is just on 24 million people, which is about the population of Mumbai. So in Mumbai, you have the whole population of Australia. However, in India, for example, the biggest proportion of the Indian population is aged under 18 years of age. The biggest proportion of the Australian population is aged over 65. By 2030, it will be over 65. The average age of a nurse in Australia is 57 years of age. 57, 58 years of age. So the average nurse is moving very quickly towards retirement. And so as the demand for nurses increases, because Australians are aging, they need more care, techniques and practices are becoming more sophisticated, so we need more specialist nurses. That's where the demand for healthcare services is going up, the available number of nurses is going down, and internationally qualified nurses fit neatly into the middle, okay? How many jobs does that mean? Approximately 30,000 new unfilled jobs per year over the next 5 to 10 years. That's great news for overseas trained nurses who are thinking about coming and living and working in Australia. There's lots of jobs available, particularly in the regional areas. So not always in Melbourne or Sydney or the major metropolitan cities, but in Perth or Adelaide or in regional Queensland, regional Victoria, New South Wales, etc. Okay, there's some very good visa programs available where the government is very keen to attract skilled overseas workers to work in regional areas and is very flexible with visa options for you as well. Okay, but approximately 30,000 nurses that we will not have enough people in Australia to fill over the next 5 and 10 years. So that's fantastic news. What you see in front of you there is what's called the skilled migration list, or the priority migration occupation list. Every year, the Australian government publishes this list. In this case, it's 17 occupations, and they do it in September and March of each year. These are the 17 occupations that, as of September, the Australian government was most keen to attract skilled migrants to come and live and work in Australia. Now, as you can see, 7 of that 17, so just close on 50%, are nursing. So midwives, specialist nurses, and general registered nurses, okay? So that is those 17 professions, 7 of those are nurses. There's high demand for nurses to work in those various areas. But as you'll notice, they're also specialist roles, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on, okay? So, what's changed in the nursing registration process? Many of you probably were familiar with what's called the EPIQ program, or the bridging program, or the IRON program. And that was the way that the Australian government used. You came to Australia for 12 weeks, you did 6 weeks in classroom, 6 weeks in a hospital doing clinical placement and clinical practice. And if you were successful in passing that, that finalized your registration. So 12 weeks, campus-based, and then in a classroom, then in a hospital, practicing and demonstrating your skills. Earlier this year in March, the Nursing Midwifery Board, so the equivalent of the INC or the Indian Nursing Council, for example, changed the way they're assessing nurses. No longer will they be assessing nurses using the 12-week on-campus course. So that is finished, okay? We're still training, we still have students in that course, but those students have been enrolled for some time and they will finish up over the next 12 months or so. The new way of assessing is what's called outcomes-based assessment, which essentially assesses your skills. So it comprises 2 components, and it's really assessing your skills over a much shorter period of time. So let's talk about the new process. And there are essentially 5 steps to you completing your nursing registration in Australia. The first step is step number 1 on the left-hand side there, a self-check. And the self-check is simply a feature, feature that's available on the Nursing Board website, where they're going to ask you some questions about 3 key pieces of information for you. The first is your nursing registration. So do you currently have nursing registration in your country where you're working or the country where you're living? Okay, so you must have current registration. The second question they'll ask is your language certificate. So do you have a current English language certificate for IELTS 7 in all 4 bands, PTE 65, or OET-B? So let me repeat those for you. IELTS 7 in all 4 bands, OET 65, or PTE-B. So you must have those 3, that document as well. And the third document you must have is you must be a bachelor qualified holder or above. So you must have a bachelor qualification or above to be eligible for registration in Australia. So if you're a GNM and you're on this webinar at the moment, don't worry, because we have a pathway for you to then help you be able to reach above level 7, and so you'll be eligible. But they're the 3 main documents that you'll do in the self-check, okay? Step number 2, you'll lodge your application online, provide those documents, some other information about your work history, some identity checks, etc. And you'll pay $640 to the nursing board, and they will then process your application. That takes about 4 to 6 weeks. Okay, they'll come back to you, and they will, because you have your primary qualification, so your bachelor has been issued overseas, or your diploma has been issued overseas, they will ask you to complete the OBA, or the outcomes-based assessment, in order to finalize your registration. Okay, so step number 3 is the outcomes-based assessment, 2 components to it. The first part is the NCLEX online test. 200 questions online. You complete that at a Pearson testing center, so a PTE or a Pearson VUE testing center, and you do that in your home country. Okay, so be that India, GCC, wherever that may be, and that's normally 3 to 4 hours for the NCLEX test. Now, the NCLEX test used in Australia is the same as the NCLEX test used in the US. However, if you've done the test in the US, you need to do it again to be eligible for Australia, okay? Once you take the NCLEX test, they will advise you within 24 hours if you pass or don't pass. If you pass, you'll be invited to then proceed on and book your OSCE or your OBA assessment, which is a 1-day assessment that you'll complete in Adelaide, which is the capital city of South Australia. Now, the OSCE assessment comprises 2 main parts. One is you will go through 4 scenarios. So you will be given, and most of you have probably done scenarios in your bachelor studies or your diploma studies, but you'll be given a scenario just as you are about to enter a training room, an assessment room. And in that room with you will be you, an assessor from the nursing board, and probably a live patient. Okay. Over the next 20 to 30 minutes, you'll be asked to demonstrate and explain the process you're going through to deliver care to that patient based on the scenario that you were given. Okay. And you'll do 4 of those with different scenarios over the course of 1 day. Okay. At the end of that day, you'll then do, we believe, 2 clinical tests, which will be a test of your clinical knowledge to perform a task. Okay. That's 1 day only. And it's there to test your skill, and it's an opportunity for you to demonstrate your fantastic skills. They'll be looking for you to demonstrate and explain a knowledge of the Australian nursing standards, the Australian healthcare standards, the legislation for healthcare delivery, privacy, etc. Okay. One of the questions normally is around how do you confirm the identity of the patient? Okay. How many steps are there? How many steps do you go through? And how many checks do you make of the person's identity to confirm that Simon is actually Simon before you start to provide care? Okay. Now, if you want to see what an OSCE test looks like, or an OSCE assessment looks like, simply go to Google and Google OSCE, OSCE, NMC, or Nursing Midwifery Council UK. Okay. The UK has been using the OSCE assessment for about the last 3 or 4 years. So there's lots of videos on YouTube which show you what an OSCE assessment looks like. Okay. So have a look at those and you'll get to understand the OSCE assessment. Now, it's really, really important that you prepare for your OBA assessments. In the UK, because Australia hasn't yet started doing the OSCE, in the UK, about 40% of nurses fail on their first attempt. So they turn up, whether they prepare or not, they come and about 40% fail on their first attempt. 30% fail on their second attempt, and about 10% fail on their third attempt. Okay, so you must prepare. The cost of doing the NCLEX test is about 550 Australian dollars. The cost of doing the OSCE assessment, the 1-day assessment, is 4,000 Australian dollars. Each time you need to do it again, you need to pay the whole fee again. So it can become very expensive if you don't make it, if you are not successful the first time and you have to come back the second time. By the time you've paid two $4,000 fees, that's the cost of the preparation courses. Okay, so it's worth investing the time and the effort in doing the preparation courses, and I'll talk to you a little bit about those later. Step number 4 is you finalize your registration. So once you have passed your OSCE, about 4 weeks later, the nursing board will send you your nursing certificate. And the 5th stage is once you've got your nursing registration, you can then start to apply for jobs. And once you are employed, your employer will work with you on a 6-month orientation to finalize your registration. And that's an orientation to on-the-job practice and on-the-job orientation to the healthcare system in Australia. So 5 simple steps. Let's just repeat those again. The cost mainly $640 to lodge your application, $550 to do the NCLEX test, $4,000 to do the OSCE test. So overall there, it's somewhere around 5,500 Australian dollars to go through the various stages of the registration process. Okay, so preparation is really, really, really important. So then you're not wasting your time and you're not wasting your money if you're not successful, because our job is to make sure that you are successful. So let's talk. What we've done is we've prepared 2 training courses to help you through the registration process, okay? And the reason we've done 2 courses, as I'll explain now, is the first part is to prepare you for NCLEX, okay? And this is an online course. Now, the reason we've done online courses, we've done the first part 1 as an online course, is because the NCLEX test is an online test, okay? So you need to become familiar with how to prepare and conduct and practice for the NCLEX test in an online environment, okay? No point doing it in a classroom and being able to tell me the answer when you're going to have to provide that answer in an online test, okay? So we're offering that online, and you would complete that in the country where you're living or working at the moment, okay? The second part is a on-campus course, 6 weeks on campus with us in Sydney, Melbourne, or Perth, okay? And that is 5 days per week, 8 hours per day. Lab practice in the morning, classroom in the afternoon, classroom in the morning, lab practice in the afternoon. You'll be practicing scenarios over and over and over again. Okay, we'll be demonstrating and teaching you the nursing standards in Australia, and then you'll be practicing and explaining just as you would do in an OSCE simulation. Okay, so let's take a bit more of a look at these 2 programs. The first one is the part 1, the NCLEX preparation, 12 weeks, 1 unit only, which obviously is MCQ preparation for registered nurses. We offer the course every 6 weeks. So the current one, the course commenced 2 days ago on Monday. That'll run for 6 weeks through to the next intake is the 23rd of November. And the intake after that is January 11, okay? 12-week course. The only requirement for admission is that you are currently you hold current nursing registration in your home country, okay? Obviously, to do the NCLEX test, you're doing that to have registration as a nurse, so you should be registered now as a nurse, okay? So that's the first one of the 2 preparation courses. The second preparation course is for the OSCE scenario testing, okay? 6-week course on campus in Australia, Melbourne, Sydney, or Perth. 1 unit, which is OSCE training and assessment. And again, you only need to be a registered nurse. The fee for that course is 5,500 Australian dollars. Okay, so when you add part 1 at 3,500 and part 2 at 5,500, that's $9,000 overall for the full preparation for your registration process. Okay, so those 2 courses, 12 weeks and 6 weeks, they will prepare you for to take your tests and to then pass your test as well, okay? For the second part, you would come to Australia on a visitor visa, a 3-month or 90-day visitor visa. And what we would suggest you do is once you have confirmed your date for your OSCE assessment in Australia, You then work backwards and enroll to do the OSCE preparation, finish that after 6 weeks, and then the next week you do your OSCE test in Adelaide, okay? And then you can take a few weeks holiday in Australia as well, okay? So that's for the OSCE preparation. Now, if you are a diploma holder, remember what I said earlier on, bachelor nurses are at a level 7 qualification, which means you are currently, if you're a bachelor holder, eligible for registration in Australia. If you're a GNM or a 3-year diploma holder, you're not eligible for registration in Australia. However, we have a solution for you. You have 2 options. You can either do a 3-year Bachelor of Nursing course in Australia, on campus in Australia. That's a 3-year course. And that means you're essentially going back to the starting point, 0, okay? You'll be studying with other 10+2 graduates. You'll be studying with other high school graduates, okay? The cost of that course is normally $60,000 to $75,000 on average, okay, over that 3 years. Probably not the best option considering you've just also completed your own 3-year diploma course as well. The second option, which is offered by IHM, is a 1-year graduate diploma in nursing, which is a level 8 qualification. So what that means is at the end of that qualification, at the end of that 1 year, you have jumped from level 6, which is your existing diploma, to level 8, which means you are then eligible for registration in Australia. Okay, so it's a 12-month course. You can complete the course on campus in Melbourne, Sydney, or Perth, or online, whichever option is better. It's exactly the same course. There is no difference between the course offered on campus versus the course that's offered online. $20,000 on campus, $12,000 online. The entry requirements, you must be a registered nurse. You've obviously got to hold your 3-year diploma, and you would have IELTS 6.5, no less than 6 in one band. OET would be 2 Cs and 2 Bs, and PTE would be 58, okay? If you're studying online and your English is not quite at IELTS 6.5 or those other grades, you have the option to submit an essay, a 500-word academic essay, okay? Eight subjects to choose from, and you then choose one, and then you provide that essay, 500 words academic essay, okay? So let me just recap. For GNMs, the only option you really have to be eligible for registration in Australia is either the graduate diploma in nursing, a 1-year course, which is also the first half of a 2-year Master of Nursing program, okay? That's the best option, 1 year. Otherwise, you're completing a 3-year Bachelor of Nursing course in Australia, okay? That's 3 more years on top of the diploma that you already hold, okay? I know which one I'd be choosing. I think I'd want to do 1 year instead of 3 more years as well, okay? If you're a bachelor nurse, the graduate diploma is the first year of a master's program. Now, the master's program has 2 very, very good benefits for both diploma holders as well as bachelor holders. Let's talk about bachelor holders to begin with. If you're a bachelor holder and you complete a 2-year master's program in Australia, that would be a Master of Nursing, and then you would choose a specialization. Could be critical care, accident, emergency, pediatrics, etc. And you complete that 2-year course. You're then eligible for a 2 or 3 year post-study work visa, which means you can then live and work in Australia for another 2 or 3 years, okay? If your partner or your spouse is coming with you to Australia, you can bring them as a student. When you're studying on a student visa, you can work 20 hours per week. They can work 40 hours per week for the whole time that you are here. If you have kids, the kids go off to school. The children can go off to local schools, okay? So if you think about it, you've got a 2-year student visa with the masters and a 2 or 3 year post-study work visa. That means you're in Australia for between 4 and 5 years, depending on if you study in Perth versus Sydney or Melbourne. Melbourne and Sydney is a 2-year visa post-study. Perth is a 3-year post-study work visa. We'll talk in a moment about what the other difference is, the other benefit of a postgraduate or a master's qualification. But for a bachelor nurse, that will significantly advance your career in Australia. If you're a GNM or a diploma nurse, this is a unique opportunity to go from diploma level to holding a Master of Nursing qualification in just 2 years. Okay. Now, if you think about that, if you're looking in India, if you're a diploma holder, you're going to have to do more study and then more study before you're even eligible to enter the master's program, which is another 2 years in India. Okay, so this is a very unique opportunity to go from a level 6 or a diploma up to a Master of Nursing, 3 years stay back. And during that time, that 3 years, you would finalize your nursing registration. And you might also choose to submit your permanent residency application as well. Okay. We offer our masters in partnership with Charles Darwin University. So IHM and Charles Darwin deliver the Master of Nursing program in Melbourne and Perth. In Sydney, we have an articulation, which means you do 1 year with us in Sydney, and then you go to Charles Darwin's campus in Sydney as well. We also offer the same program, a 1 year with us, 1 year with Wollongong University in New South Wales as well. Okay. The last point is the one I mentioned earlier, the option to apply for your post-study work visa after masters. Okay. 2 year masters, 3 year post-study work visa. Okay. Australian qualifications are recognized around the world. So if you were, for example, if you were thinking, well, I'm thinking of coming to Australia, but I'm also looking at Canada and the UK or Ireland, the graduate diploma in nursing, the course we've just spoken about, is recognized in the UK. It's recognized in Ireland. It's recognized in Singapore. It's recognized in Dubai. Okay. So if you can study this Australian qualification online in India and continue working and continue living as you are at home now, for example. And then once you've completed your course and you've got your certificate, you can take that to the UK, to the Nursing Midwifery Council, and they will recognize that as a postgraduate qualification, and that will increase or improve your registration status as well. Okay. So whether you're coming to Australia or you're thinking, well, maybe I want to look at other countries, the recognition in other countries is also there for you. Okay. So why would you choose IHM? Four straightforward reasons. Number one is that all of our educators and lecturers are either masters or PhD qualified nurses. They're all registered nurses. They're working nurses. They've worked and they've taught for many years. So they're highly skilled. They work in shifts. They know how hospitals work, and their job is to spread that knowledge to you. If you're studying online, our online learning platform is very simple to use, easy to access, whether you're doing it on your mobile phone or whether you're doing it from a computer, or whether you are using one of our education hubs in different parts of the world. The third thing, which is really important, is 24/7 student support. When most students need support, often after 9 p.m. at night, you're working, you've got family, you sit down to do some study, and you're normally doing that after 9 o'clock at night. So our support team is available when you need it, not when it's convenient for us. So they're online 24/7, whether you need to talk to an educator or you're having problem accessing the portal, or whether you're having problem, you've just got a question you need answered, one of our support team members will be available to do that for you. As I showed earlier, state-of-the-art facilities. Our nursing labs in Australia you walk out of our nursing lab into a hospital, it's exactly the same equipment. And that's the training that we need to do, and that's the level of training we need to provide as well. Okay. So now let's talk about something pretty important when you are considering where you might like to work around the world. The chart that's in front of you there on the right-hand side, these are pay rates for nurses, registered nurses in Australia, and this is as of the 16th of October, so about 4 days ago. So these are very current rates. Now, there's 3 things I'll point out to you. First of all, unlike in India, where you're generally paid a monthly salary, and whether you work 10 hours or 100 hours, you still get that monthly salary. Okay. In Australia, there is a very different pay scales for nurses. As you'll see here, RN2, which means that would mean a registered nurse with a minimum of 2 years experience. Okay, so RN2, RN3, the 3, 4, 5, as your experience increases, you then become RN2, 3, 4, etc. In Australia, you're also paid different rates based on whether you're working a morning shift, an afternoon shift, or whether you're working a night shift. Okay, and as you can see, $43 for a day shift, $58 for a night shift. So there's an extra $15 per hour, an 8-hour shift. There's an extra $120 per day if you're working a night shift. Okay, and everybody does night shifts, as we know. If 1 week out of every 4, the roster will be a night shift. If you work on Saturdays, there's 1.25 of your hourly rate is paid to you extra because you're working on a Saturday. If you work on Sundays, it's 1.5. And if you're working on a public holiday, it's double time. So that's 43, as you can see, becomes $86 per hour. Okay. So as you can imagine, that pay scale, that is the law, that is embedded in the law. So every employer will pay the same rates. Okay. Different hospitals will pay slightly different hourly rates, but they're required to pay those rates. Based on this, we've done a quick calculation which shows that the average salary for a registered nurse working a mix of a day, afternoon and night shift and an occasional weekend and public holiday is 78,000 Australian dollars per year. Now don't convert that to rupee because it's a whole lot of rupee. Okay, the average wage in Australia is 57,000 Australian dollars. So a nurse is paid well above the average wage in Australia. Okay, this is for a staff registered nurse. This is for a registered nurse holding a bachelor qualification. If you choose to study a 2-year master's program, which means by the end of that you are then also a specialist nurse, the salary increases to between $95,000 and $100,000 per year. Okay, so you go from 77 to 95 to $100,000. So it's about $25,000 more in salary for a master's qualified nurse versus a bachelor qualified nurse. Okay, so that's quite a difference when you think about it as well. And then obviously, as I said earlier, afternoon, there's varying pay scales based on whether you're working a morning shift or whether you're working a public holiday as well. Okay, so if you think about $25,000 per year more salary for a bachelor holder to a master's holder, and the cost of the 2-year master's program is $45,000, in just 2 years, you will cover the entire cost of your master's program with the increase between the $77,000 and the $95,000. That's a very, very short time to recover all of the cost of your master's program. Now, our master's programs are more affordable than some universities will charge. Often universities will charge somewhere around $55,000 to $65,000 for a 2-year master's program, on average about $30,000 per year. Ours, we charge $22,000 per year. And the reason is very simple. This is a master's in nursing. Nurses earn good salaries, but nurses are not being paid $100,000 per week. So we need to make them affordable because nurses work hard, but you also need to have affordable education. And that's our commitment to you. Our master's is $45,000 for the 2 years. Okay. So in 2 years, you will have recovered the entire cost of your master's with just the difference between being a bachelor nurse versus being a master's nurse as well. Okay. So that's pretty much all of the information I wanted to talk to you today. There's a lot of information in there. We've talked about the nursing registration process and the change from the IHM program or the bridging course to the OBA assessment. I think OBA is actually a better way of being tested for nurses because it allows you to demonstrate your fantastic skills. We've talked about, about the job market. We've talked about salaries, so you get an understanding of how much nurses are paid in Australia. And we've also talked about the courses, the postgraduate courses that are available for GNMs to become eligible for nursing, for registration, and for both GNM and bachelor students to complete their masters, along with the 2 preparation courses for the OBA, NCLEX and OSCE Preparation. So hopefully we've been able to give you a bit of an update about what's happening as far as education, etc. goes. Okay. I'll hand it over to you now. If you have any questions at all, now's the time to ask, and we will be here until we answer all of your questions. I think the last one of these we did yesterday, Bodhi, I think we had, sorry, the one we did last Friday, we spent 1.5 hours answering questions. So we'll be here as long as you need to. Okay.
Thank you, Simon.
I'll hand it back to Bodhi as our moderator, and please
yes,
shoot us
thank you,
some
Simon.
questions.
There are a lot of questions actually coming in from students, but majority of them are related to visa. So I think Bookmark Education,
Yep.
they are well equipped to answer all their questions. However, some of the questions, I'll just bundle them together, club them together, so it's easy for you to answer.
Fantastic.
So, okay. So Gora Joshan wants to know the registration difference between the registration process for a GNM and a bachelor's. So what is the difference?
Okay, exactly the same. Okay, so remember what I said to you earlier, a bachelor nurse and a GNM nurse, because to be eligible for registration, a GNM nurse must have the level 8 qualification. Okay, once you achieve the level 8 qualification, the registration process is exactly the same for both GNM or for what is now a postgraduate nurse and a bachelor nurse. You both do the same NCLEX test. You both do the same OSCE and OBA assessment. No difference whatsoever. Okay, so once a GNM has completed the 1-year graduate diploma, you're then eligible for registration, and the nursing board looks at you both the same, and you both do the same preparation and assessment.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for that. And we have received a lot of questions regarding the gap, so the recency of practice. So there are a few attendees here with us today who have 3 years or 2 years of gap. So they have not worked in the past 2 to 3 years. So how can we help them? Okay.
So the Australian Nursing Board is actually quite flexible when it comes to, very generous when it comes to recency of practice. So as long as a nurse has worked 3 months, so that's 3 months in the past 5 years, you meet the recency of practice requirements. Okay, so 3 months is 455 hours. So you need to have, if you have not worked for 2 or 3 years, that's fine. As long as you've worked 3 months in the past 5 years, you meet the recency of practice. If you haven't worked 3 months in the past 5 years, the graduate diploma in nursing is recognized as meeting the recency of practice requirements. So you may have finished your bachelor, for example, you may have gone on to become a teacher. You might have done your master's, or you may have gone for bachelor to then go and do teaching or research or non-clinical work. Okay, so if you're in that situation, the graduate diploma, the 1-year postgraduate course, meets the nursing board's requirements to meet the recency of practice. Okay, so you put a tick in that box straight away, even if you have not worked as a nurse, worked as a clinical nurse for the past 5 years.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Simon. So we have lots of questions regarding the current situation in Australia. Yep. When can international students expect to enter Australia?
Sure. Good question. It's a really good question, and it's one that's right on the top of our mind as well at the moment. So there's probably one thing that we want to communicate to all of you is, if you have a question, contact us or contact Bookmark. Okay, don't listen to all the stuff you read in the chat forums and in the chat groups, because quite often it's the wrong information. Okay, so what is the situation now? Australia has 7 states. Each state is at a different stage of handling the COVID situation. Okay, we have people coming from, we have tourists coming and students coming from New Zealand to New South Wales, Northern Territory, and next week, South Australia. Okay, over the next few weeks, that will expand further to Queensland and to other states. We have students coming from Singapore, and they're coming from Singapore, and they're coming from China, Southeast Asia, and they're coming to Darwin, for example. So we're already starting to see international students in small groups starting to come to Australia in very small groups. They're going into quarantine for 14 days, and then they're going on to their courses, okay? So what we expect is going to happen is over the next, early next year, from early next year onwards, we expect that there will be small groups and then bigger groups and bigger groups of students being allowed to come to Australia in different arrangements. We have put proposals to the government already for our students to either come through Singapore to Perth, quarantine in Perth, to be able to come to Sydney, or to come to Melbourne in the future, okay? So 2 things, please check your information. Talk to IHM or talk to Bookmark about what is happening in Australia, okay? The Nursing Registration Board at the moment is still issuing decision letters for OBA. So if you apply to the Nursing Registration Board, they will issue you with a decision letter for OBA, and they'll continue to do that. At the moment, you can do your NCLEX test, do your preparation, then do your NCLEX test. And then by early next year, we expect they will be starting to schedule OBA courses, okay? So the borders are beginning to, the internal restrictions are beginning to lift, okay? Today in Melbourne, today in Australia, total of Australia, I think we had 24 cases total. In Melbourne, we had 3. Yesterday, we had 1. The day before, we had 3, okay? In Perth, they had, in Northern Territory, they had 0. In Adelaide, they had 0. So there's very, very low case numbers. So that makes Australia a really safe destination to come as the opportunity comes through as well over the next few months. We don't expect there'll be much change between now and perhaps the end of this year, but we do expect there will start to be some changes beginning of next year, and more international students will be able to come into the different states as the COVID risk reduces even further as well, okay? So there's all sorts, as I said, there's students already coming to Northern Territory. There's New Zealanders who are coming here on holidays, students, they're already coming into Sydney, into New South Wales, Northern Territory, and now South Australia, okay?
Thank you, Simon, for breaking it down for us. Okay. Thank you. So we have another question regarding the gap. So people want to know here, the attendees, that if they've not studied or worked in the past 2 to 3 years, can they still enroll into GDN with us?
Right. It's an interesting question. The postgraduate courses for registered, there's a key thing. You must be a registered nurse in order to be eligible to enter the postgraduate course. So the traditional, and Bodhi, correct me if I go off track here, but the traditional gap that exists if you're applying to, for example, a bachelor course or whatever it may be, really is not relevant when you're looking at nursing registration, okay? Because you're entering, if you haven't worked for 2 or 3 years, or you have not studied for 2 or 3 years, then if you haven't studied for 2 or 3 years, that means you've graduated with your bachelor or your diploma and you've been working, okay? So that's good because you're then gaining experience, which is what postgraduate study wants to look for, okay? Yes. So because that's how you maintain your registration. If you don't work, you can't maintain your registration. So unlike some different universities or different courses where if you have not studied for 5 years or 7 years, that's seen as a problem. For us, to be honest, it's actually a benefit, because that if you can show that you've been working in that period of time, then that's really what we're looking for, because the more experience you have, the better position you are in order to advance your nursing career as well.
Yes, thank you, Simon.
Okay.
Okay, so we have another question regarding our admission criteria.
Yep.
So apart from IELTS, what are the other English scorecards that we accept?
So 3 choices. IELTS, obviously we talked about. PTE, so the Pearson Test of English, which is really popular in Australia these days. So Australia, a lot of nurses and a lot of students are completing the PTE test, the Pearson Test of English. And to enter the course, you need 57 on that Pearson Test of English, okay? So that's quite achievable. It's a little bit of, Nurses and healthcare workers tend to find that a little bit easier to complete because it's more general English. It's not a technical English. IELTS tends to be very technical English. You can also, the third option, Bodhi, is the OET, which is the Occupational English Test, which is an English test for healthcare workers particularly. And that would be, to enter the course, is 2 C's and 2 B's, okay? Combination of 2 C's. OET is rated as A, B, and C, okay? I think that's right, A, B, and C. And that's 2 C's and 2 B's. Lesser number of nurses have done OET. OET is very popular in Europe, for example. Australia recognises it, but only in the last few years. PTE is probably the most popular, which is 57. Okay. Now, PT is an online test. So that's a Pearson test of English. There's preparation courses. We run an 8-week preparation course. There's lots of testing centres. Do be careful when you look at the testing centre you're using. Okay. PTE is an online test. Okay. So you should be learning in an online environment, because otherwise you're not going to be familiar with how to pass the test when you go and sit in front of a computer and all of the knowledge is gone because you're sitting there thinking, I've never used an online test before. Okay. So the preparation is really important. Lots of PT. I spoke to someone yesterday. They went to a PTE center for 8 weeks and they were handed photocopied sheets as they walked in the door, Bodhi, and that's all they got every day. At the end of it, they thought, fantastic, I'm ready to go. They went and booked their time, sat in front of a computer and went, uh-oh, I'm in trouble because I've never used a computer to do this test. Okay, so make sure you're using computers when you're practicing. We offer the course. You can talk to Bookmark about that as well, and it's a great way to get ready for your PTE test.
Yes, thank you, Simon. So we have a very simple question. You've probably covered.
I like simple questions.
Me too. So you've already covered it, but I guess this attendee wants a reconfirmation.
Yep.
So can a BSc nurse study GDN?
Of course they can. So a BSc nurse can study. Let's go back a step and let's be really clear so everybody understands. If you're a BSc holder, so you've done your 4-year bachelor, you can apply to be registered now. Okay. You don't need to do any further study. The reason as a BSc you would do further study is because you want to work towards a master's. You want to be paid more. You want to work in a different environment. You don't want to be a staff nurse. You want to be the nurse supervisor or the nurse unit manager. Okay, that's what it will allow you to do. You want to be a specialist in accident, emergency, critical care, neonatal, pediatrics, etc. Okay, quite a lot of nurses, Bodhi, have particularly in India and in the Middle East, etc., and Asia, they have learned experience. So they work as a theatre nurse, for example, but they don't have the qualification as a theatre nurse. They have their bachelor and then they might have 5 years of theatre nurse practice. Okay. When they apply to Australia, the nursing board says, if you do not have a postgraduate specialisation in as a theatre nurse, then all we recognise is your bachelor course. Okay. So if you're a nurse who's been working in a hospital and you might have done 2 or 3 or 4 years as a specialist, pediatrics, theatre, accident, emergency, critical care, and you do not have that qualification, the GDN is the first step to being recognised to have that, to qualify your experience as well. It works you towards your master's. So a bachelor nurse, I would strongly encourage to work toward a master's. You're a specialist, you'll be the nurse unit manager rather than the nurse being managed. It increases your salary considerably, and the demand, to be honest, is much greater for specialist nurses as well.
Yes, thank you, Simon. So I think we have answered all the questions.
Good.
So the remaining questions, I think BM Education, they will handle them because they are related to migration. Okay. But apart from that, yes.
Good.
Yes.
Well, thank you all for attending. Thank you all for your time. One thing I would say before we close is thank you to all of you as nurses who are working in these really, really difficult times. COVID-19 is global. We're all seeing the news reports every day. We're seeing how hard nurses work. We're seeing you working extra shifts, really difficult conditions. So congratulations and thank you to all of you.
Yes.
We really, really applaud your efforts. And on behalf of all of us, non-nurses, thank you for your dedication as well. We hope to look forward to seeing you in Australia. talk to Bookmark, talk to BM Education. They're our trusted partner. So we work with very few trusted partners. So you can be sure we know them, they know us, they know the standards that we expect, and they work very closely with our admissions and enrollment team. So if you have any questions, just contact the guys at Bookmark. If they can't answer it, they'll ask our guys. If you want to send us an email, just go to our website and you can send us an email directly, and we'll make sure that Bookmark knows you've asked those questions, and then everybody's familiar with what's happening. So good luck. We look forward to seeing you in Australia or online, whichever works for you. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you.